culprit wants you to identify which one is Evelyn. If you think she's Evelyn, press like. And if you think she's Evelyn, press subscribe. And if you think she is Evelyn, you leave a comment. And if you think she is the real Evelyn, you like, comment, and subscribe. You have 1 second. I don't think this mind trick's gonna work. In this video, we're gonna discuss about how do you wanna pull for Evelyn? Do you wanna pull her gently? Or maybe roughly? Or you want Evelyn to pull you? It's none of the above, cause you wanna pull her with RYU, because how dare you separate them apart? Anyway, the main reason is Evelyn and RYU are working better than bread and butter, probably at the same levels with the Miyabi and Yanagi, because their kids are designed to work together. And getting an RYU for Evelyn is definitely better than getting a signature weapon. And getting signature weapon is better than getting Mindscape 1. But just keep in mind that you need about 190 pulls for 2 limited characters and about 160 pulls for a limited and a signature weapon. Of course, I'm saying this as in average, not the guarantee. And I do think that that extra 30 pulls to get RYU is definitely worth it as compared to getting signature Wenjin. So do that with your own risk, because I do think that Evelyn by herself is also doing perfectly fine, but you would be missing a lot without RYU. And you could kind of say that Evelyn need Astra more than Astra need Evelyn. It's actually kind of sad to say that from the lore perspective. Well, to sum it up about the pool decision, basically if you have Astra or Lighter, you would get a lot of value out of Evelyn. Qingyi and Koleda is also great for her. And if you're one of those day 1 player, having enough DPS, you could consider skipping her. And if you're like totally new to the game and you feels like you don't have enough DPS for the content, then Evelyn would give you a really good smooth sail with or without Astra or Lighter. But let's go with the basics of her mechanics. So Evelyn's gameplay is revolving around the chain attacks, and every time she deals the chain attacks, the damage is gonna be roughly about almost a half of her ultimate. And she got this really unique mechanics that allow her to activate the chain attacks by herself. And every time when she bend down and do one of these, it means that she's activating the chain attacks. And your goal of playing Evelyn is to let her activate this as much as possible. So much so that your neuron activated to the point that you're immune to the Alzheimer's. And even better, align it with the buff and debuff along with the stun window. She actually feels much easier to play than Jane though, if you understand how she works. So when you're playing Evelyn, you gotta pay attention to this bar here, and it's gonna charge up with your normal attacks and the skill. And as soon as this bar is over 50%, you wanna hold your attacks or your skill to perform these special attacks. So you get a stack here, and when you reach the maximum stack, it's gonna perform chain attacks when you hold your basic and hold your skill. And you don't even need to wait until you get the full stack. You could do it with 2 stack and with 50% bar. So if you hold attack at this condition, the attacks is gonna continue and activate the chain attacks with just holding a button. So she actually feels really smooth to play. And keep in mind that if you keep normal attacking the enemy or the skill on the enemy when your bar is full, it's not gonna do anything. So remember to use whole skill and attacks when the bar turns red. And her ultimate deals a lot of damage just like any other DPS. And she would get a permanent stack on her bar so that you could perform chain attacks even more frequently. So you definitely wanna use her ultimate as soon as you have it so that you could see Evelyn strip her jacket off and see more of her skin and the armpit. And that permanent stack would allow you to do something really cool, like you could activating 2 chain attacks by just holding 1 button without any help of any other unit. And you could also do this 4 chain attacks in a row if you're pairing her with the RYU. So I got RYU use her ultimate here and chain attack into Evelyn. And Evelyn chain attacks by herself with all of her resources. And do this double chain attack that I just showed you. Then I chain attacks into RYU, and her ultimate is still lingered and chain attack into the Evelyn again. And the amounts of damage would be really damn good if you could line up all the chain attacks into the stun window. And this mechanics would make her Mindscape 1 extremely valuable because she would immediately get half of the ultimate at the start of the game, and of course 12% defense shred, and I do think that Mindscape 1 is a really good stopping point. And the other main mechanics about Evelyn is that she's gonna have like 125% increase of damage when she has over 80% of crit rate, and she also has this passive to buff herself with 25% crit rate at the max level, and that gives us a really good indicator that you need at least 55% crit rate on her, which we are going to talk about her build later. So to get this 25% crit rate, it's actually really easy and you could do it without realizing it. The first way is tap your skill with or without energy, and you're gonna see this red line here. It means that you got 25% crit rate. And you could also get this buff by finish your 5th basic attack, dodge counter, or when you are doing quick assist. And it would also activate it when you are performing chain attacks on hit. So you don't have to worry about pre-buffing before performing chain attacks or the ultimate. It would only reflect on your basic attacks, which is not her main sources of damage. And I think it doesn't even matter if your buff is on or not. So you don't need to overthink about this 25% crit rate. Her whole skill would groups a lot of mobs with larger area, and when the red line is on the enemy and swap Evelyn off, it would also groups the enemy in a smaller area, which is very ideal when you're playing her with a stunner to get an easy stun and clear all the mobs with Evelyn chain attacks. And that's why RYU works so well with Evelyn, because her ultimate could activate the chain attack without stunning the enemy. There's no other unit that could benefit from chain attacks as much as Evelyn. So let's move on to the W engine. It's actually kind of complicated to talk about W engine, but we'll just lay out the number first. So the best one is definitely the signature weapon, followed with the brimstone with any other crit rate based signature weapon. And the Nekomata signature weapon is not recommended because you need to hit the target from the back for the buff to procs. So the general recommendation aside from the signature weapon would be brimstone, the event engine, Mercado Desire, and Starlight engine. And building Evelyn is kind of tricky. She is very easy to build to the baseline levels, but very hard to build as your gear is getting better, because Evelyn's crit rate is so high that you could get over 100% if you're not careful with your build. So basically you want 55% crit rate on the stat and not more than 75% on the stat, so that you get 80% to 100% crit rate in the game, as she would inevitably get the buff from her passive, which is 25% buff that I just talked about it previously. And if you're using signature weapon or this event W engine, which gives 24 and 20 crit rate, you would get 68% crit rate right off the bat. And most of the guide and people out there would probably pick Woodpecker, which give 8% crit rate, so you kind of get 76% crit rate or 72 with the event one without any substat. In that case, you don't really have a lot of room for the crit rate, and with these levels of crit rate, Inferno Metal is not even an option unless you are using Brimstone or Starlight engine, which doesn't give you crit rate. And the only team that is available for that right now is Lighter Bernice team, because pretty much any other fire unit wouldn't be able to build up the anomaly quickly enough, or maybe the Poucha Bernice in the future. Using Inferno Forset is gonna be very restrictive, and since Evelyn is heavily relying on the chain attacks, the buff from the Woodpecker wouldn't have the best uptime for Evelyn. So the Woodpecker set is definitely not the most ideal set for her, because she wouldn't get all the passive, and Inferno Forset would have too high of a crit rate and very conditional. The passive from the Puffer Electro and the Hormone Punch are not exactly good either for Evelyn. With all that said, I would wager that Swing Jazz could be her best set. I'm pretty sure that it's gonna be better than Infernal Force set in terms of versatility, and definitely better than Hormone Punks and the Puffer Electro, cause you would get 100% uptime after the first chain attacks, and 20% energy regen is also good on Evelyn, because that could enable her to use more skill and enable her to chain attacks more. I can't tell for sure that Swing Jazz is gonna be better than Woodpecker. We will test this out on the release, and Woodpecker 4 set would be a safer choice. And for the 2 set, Branch and Blade Song is slightly better than Hormone Punks. You wanna go for the one with better substat. This number 4, you wanna go for crit damage and maybe crit rate if you couldn't achieve 55% crit rate on stat and ADs in the game. This number 5, if you're playing with lighter, you definitely wanna go for pen ratio, follow with attacks percentage. And if you're not playing with lighter, elemental damage is the best choice, and attack percentage on the disc number 6. And your substat, and as I mentioned earlier, 55% on stat and 80% in game, follow with crit damage and attack percentage. And Evelyn's team comp is a lot more complex than I thought it would be. I'll just leave it on my next video, and see you guys.